What if I told you that the mountains you see on the horizon are not just piles of stone pushed upward by time, but living beings who have witnessed every secret that humankind has tried to bury? Travelers often say that mountains are silent, but that is not true. They whisper always. You just need to know how to listen. This story begins with three travelers who sought adventure. But what they found was something far older than themselves, something that reshaped their understanding of life and death. Long ago, deep in the northern lands where the forests stretch endlessly and the winds carve through valleys like invisible rivers, there stood a chain of mountains shrouded in mist. The locals called them the Silent Peaks, for no bird ever sang above their ridges and no shepherd ever dared climb their heights. Legends whispered that those who tried never returned, or if they did, they came back with eyes clouded as though they had seen something the mind was not meant to endure. But travelers are often drawn not to safety, but to the places marked forbidden. The first traveler, Elias, was a historian who believed every myth hid a kernel of truth. The second, Mira, was a painter searching for landscapes untouched by human hands. The third, Daren, was a wanderer with no destination but always a hunger for the unknown. Together, they made their way to the Silent Peaks, convinced that the mountains hid not just danger, but revelations. Their journey began like any other, with boots pressing into soft earth, air growing thinner as they ascended, and laughter masking the quiet dread in their chests. At first, the mountains seemed almost welcoming. Streams of crystal water cut through meadows bright with flowers, and the wind carried the scent of pine. But after 3 days of climbing, the beauty began to change. The trees grew twisted, leaning as if to avoid some unseen presence. The streams ran slower, their waters darkening with a faint shimmer of silver, like moonlight trapped in liquid. At night, the travelers heard whispers that seemed to rise from the stones beneath them. They told themselves it was only the wind, yet every word seemed deliberate, forming shapes in their minds they could not quite dismiss. On the fourth night, Mira painted by the firelight, and when Elias leaned over to look at her canvas, his breath froze in his throat. She had painted not the campsite, not the cliffs around them, but a colossal face emerging from the side of the mountain itself, its eyes closed, its mouth hidden in shadow. She stared at the painting in confusion, insisting she had only let her hand move freely, as though guided by something unseen. Daren, though usually careless, grew uneasy. He told them of a tale he had once heard in a distant village, that mountains were the burial grounds of forgotten gods, and when people walked too far into their hearts, those gods stirred. They laughed it off, trying to hide their fear, but the next day the mountains grew steeper, the path narrowing into ledges that overlooked abysses without end. The silence was absolute, so deep that even their own voices seemed swallowed whole. That evening, Elias opened his notebook to compare Mira's strange painting with old maps, and he noticed something impossible. Where he had drawn the outlines of the mountain range days earlier, the shapes had shifted. The peaks no longer stood as they had. Instead, they curved inward, as though enclosing the travelers in a vast circle. It was as if the mountains themselves had moved. He tried not to believe it, but deep inside, he knew something was watching them. When dawn came, they found a stone staircase they had never seen before, carved into the mountainside, half buried under moss and lichen. No human hand could have built it. It was too vast, each step the size of a man, yet worn smooth as if thousands of years had passed since its creation. They should have turned back. They should have chosen life over curiosity. But curiosity is stronger than fear, and so they climbed, each step echoing not in the air, but inside their very bones. At the summit of the staircase, they reached a plateau where the mist thickened until they could see no more than a few paces ahead. Yet in the heart of the fog stood something unmistakable, a gate of stone, arched higher than any cathedral, engraved with spirals that seemed to shift when not directly looked upon. Beyond it was darkness, but not ordinary darkness, the kind that feels alive, the kind that draws you closer even as every instinct screams to flee. Mira reached out first, her fingers brushing the stone, and the ground trembled as if the mountain had taken a breath. Then came the voice. It was not heard with ears but felt in their chests, deep and resonant, like the language of Earth itself. You have entered the threshold of memory, it said. Few are chosen, fewer return. Step forward, and the mountains will show you not what you seek, but what you are. The travelers stood frozen before the gate, their hearts thundering as the words echoed not in sound but in thought, reverberating through their marrow. Mira's hand lingered on the stone, her eyes wide, as if she had glimpsed something far beyond the veil of mist. Elias scribbled furiously in his notebook, trying to capture every detail, but the ink seemed to spread on the page in strange patterns, forming lines he had not written. Daren shifted uneasily, torn between the thrill of the unknown and a pull deep inside warning him that they had crossed a line no mortal should dare. Yet curiosity triumphed, as it always does, and together they stepped through the gate. The air changed immediately. It was thicker, older, carrying a weight that pressed on their lungs and slowed their steps. The mist did not disperse but clung to their skin like breath upon glass. Beneath their feet the stone path was smooth, unnaturally so, as though countless feet had once walked here, yet the silence told them they were utterly alone. Then, faintly, shapes began to emerge within the fog, structures, towering pillars carved from the mountain itself, their surfaces etched with spirals and runes that glimmered faintly, as if reacting to the traveler's presence. Mira whispered that she felt as though the paintings she had never meant to create were now rising around them in stone. Elias compared the markings to symbols he had studied in ancient scripts, but none matched. They were older than any human tongue. Daren touched one of the pillars and recoiled instantly, his hand burning though no flame had touched him. In his mind flashed an image. Countless figures bowing before something colossal, their faces hidden, their voices unified in a soundless chant. He did not tell the others, for he feared that speaking it would make it real. The path led them deeper until they reached a vast amphitheater carved into the mountainside. It was impossible in scale, grander than any city square, its tiers of stone seating stretching into the mist. At its center lay a pool of water so dark it reflected nothing, not even their own forms. As they approached, the mist thinned slightly, revealing what rested beneath the surface. Shapes moved within the water, not fish, not any creature known to them, but shadows of mountains themselves, rising and sinking as if the pool were a mirror of the world above. When Mira bent closer, one of the shadows opened an eye. She screamed and stumbled back, but Elias caught her, his face pale, yet filled with awe. He murmured that the pool was not water but memory, the very essence of the mountain's past, alive and watching. Daren threw a stone into the pool in defiance, but instead of sinking, it hovered above the surface, crumbled to dust, and dissolved into the air. Then the voice returned. This time all three felt it simultaneously, coursing through their veins like the pulse of the earth. You who trespass in the realm of the eternal witness, it said, your hearts are weighed. You seek beauty, knowledge, and escape, but what you find will be truth. Choose now. Drink and see. The surface of the pool rippled, as though inviting them to lean closer. Elias was the first to move. He had always chased truth, believing that knowledge, no matter how dark, was worth the price. Kneeling, he touched the water and let it cling to his fingertips before bringing it to his lips. The instant it touched his tongue, he convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and his body trembled violently before going still. Mira cried out, but then Elias opened his eyes again. They were no longer the eyes of the man she had known. They were deep, endless, reflecting stars that could not be seen in any earthly sky. In a voice not fully his own, Elias spoke. The mountains are not stone. They are the husks of dreamers older than time. They sleep, but every footstep, every breath of wind stirs them. They dream of us, and we are their dream. His words chilled them to the bone, for the weight of them felt undeniable, resonating with something their souls already knew. Mira shook her head, unwilling to accept it. She stepped back, insisting it was madness. But at the same time, her painter's soul yearned to see what her hand had already begun to reveal on canvas. She too bent toward the pool, her reflection wavering, her features dissolving into shapes she could not name. When she tasted the water, she did not convulse. Instead, tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "They show me colors that do not exist in our world, skies that never darken, suns that never rise. They show me eternity, and it is not cruel. It is simply vast." Daren remained alone, staring at his companions with growing dread. His wanderer's heart, once fearless, now faltered. He had sought the unknown, but not this, not truths so large they threatened to erase the meaning of his life. The pool rippled again, calling him, but he shook his head violently, refusing. "I will not drink," he said, though his voice trembled. The ground beneath them shuddered, as though the mountains themselves disapproved. The voice returned, louder, heavier, shaking the amphitheater. "To refuse is to remain blind. To see is to be remade. Choose, or be chosen." The pool surged, black water rising like living hands, reaching toward Daren as Mira and Elias cried out his name. He stumbled back, the mist thickening, the pillars glowing brighter as if the entire mountain had awakened. Daren's heart pounded in his chest like a drum of warning as the black water surged closer, reaching with intent that was almost tangible. Elias and Mira, transformed by the pool's memory, reached out toward him, their hands trembling but no longer quite human. Their eyes reflected stars, vast skies, and landscapes that had never existed on Earth. The voice of the mountains filled the air, not spoken, but imprinted directly upon the mind, vibrating in a rhythm that seemed to echo through every bone, every nerve, every thought. Do you deny what you are meant to see? Do you reject eternity for the fleeting comfort of ignorance? Daren's breath caught, and for a moment he felt as if time itself had slowed. Every step he had ever taken, every road, every summit, every turn in the wind, led him here. To refuse now was to choose the world he knew, to step back into ordinary life, knowing that what lay beyond the threshold could never be unlearned. The mist coiled around him, thick and suffocating, and he realized the mountains were alive in ways he could never have imagined, aware of his hesitation, weighing it, testing it. Behind him, the amphitheater walls seemed to shimmer, revealing glimpses of other travelers, shadows of the curious and the brave who had entered long before them. Faces etched with wonder, fear, or madness, frozen in eternal tableau. Daren's hands shook, the pull of the water irresistible, but he forced himself to breathe, focusing on the warmth of the sun he had never seen at this height, the scent of pine, the life he had known. Then, without fully understanding why, he stepped closer to the pool, letting his fingers brush the black surface. The moment he touched it, the world around him shifted violently. The mist dissolved, replaced by a vision that stretched beyond comprehension. He saw mountains as living beings, their stone skin rippling like liquid, their jagged peaks bending and twisting, inhaling the sky and exhaling storms. Rivers of silver ran along veins of gold and obsidian, carrying memories of eons past. Creatures moved through the mountains, not animals, but forms of thought made flesh, shimmering and luminous. They whispered in languages made of light and vibration, and every whisper told stories of travelers, of seekers, of dreamers, of those who had been remade by the mountain's gaze. Daren felt himself pulled inside, not physically, but as if his consciousness had been unbound. He walked through landscapes that did not exist, fields of color that could not be named, skies where suns circled in impossible orbits. He felt centuries in a heartbeat, and in that moment he understood. The mountains did not merely witness the world. They remembered it, folded it into themselves, and offered it back to those willing to see. He glimpsed Elias and Mira, each now radiant with knowledge and memory, their forms fluid, shifting between human and mountain, dream and reality. They beckoned him forward, and he realized he had a choice: to drink fully and surrender, to join them in the eternal observation of all that was, and all that would be, or to retreat, leaving behind the knowledge, returning to the fleeting comforts of mortal life. Fear warred with awe in his chest. His mind screamed to turn away, to close his eyes, to leave the amphitheater and never speak of it again. But his heart, the part that had always wandered, always sought, always questioned, pulled him onward. He knelt beside the pool, letting the black water lap over his hands, feeling its cold clarity seep into his veins. And then he drank. The taste was not water, not air, not anything he had ever known. It was memory, it was time, it was the weight of stone, the rush of rivers, the silence of centuries, the laughter and sorrow of those who had walked the mountains before him. His vision exploded into a cascade of color and light, and he saw himself in every age, in every stone, in every whisper of wind. The mountains did not forgive. They did not punish. They simply revealed, and revelation was its own eternity. Daren fell to his knees, no longer afraid, no longer himself, yet fully alive in a way he could never have imagined. The voice of the mountain spoke again, gentler now, yet more immense than ever. You have seen. You have remembered. You are the witness, and the witness is eternal. Carry what you have learned into the world of men. But know this: some truths cannot be spoken, only felt, and those who feel may never return unchanged. When the mists finally cleared, the travelers were gone from ordinary sight. To anyone passing through the valley below, the silent peaks looked as they always had, silent, imposing, and unmoving. Yet the wind carried a strange resonance, almost like laughter, almost like words just beyond comprehension. And sometimes, when the sun strikes the stones at the right angle, you can see three figures, not fully human, not fully mountain, walking along hidden ledges, eyes glimmering with stars, hands tracing the shapes of landscapes that exist only in memory, forever bound to the mountains that never sleep. Time flows differently in the heart of the mountains, and yet, for those outside, it seemed only hours had passed. Travelers who later ventured near the silent peaks spoke of strange phenomena, shadows that moved against the wind, echoes of laughter that did not belong to any human, and footprints that led nowhere. But the truth was far beyond ordinary perception. Elias, Mira, and Daren had become part of the mountain's memory, witnesses bound to the stones and streams, yet still conscious, still seeing, still feeling. In the plateau of the amphitheater, the pool of black water remained, now calm, reflecting the stars as if the night sky had descended to touch the earth. The mountains themselves shifted subtly, guiding travelers, opening paths, hiding others, teaching the lessons of patience, reverence, and curiosity. Within the travelers, the transformation had completed. Elias, once a mere historian, now held the sum of ages in his awareness. He saw civilizations rise and fall, rivers carve canyons, storms sweep valleys, and mountains whisper their secrets into the wind. Mira, the painter, perceived color and light beyond human senses. She could trace the shapes of time, paint the architecture of memory itself, and feel the pulse of the world in every brushstroke of her mind. Daren, who had hesitated at the threshold, now understood balance. He became the bridge between the human world and the eternal mountains, walking paths invisible to others, carrying the wisdom of both. Together, they moved as one yet separate, their forms flowing like mist over peaks and ridges, sometimes glimpsed by mortals, sometimes hidden in the folds of eternity. And the mountains? They slept, yet never fully. Every step, every whisper, every heartbeat of those who dared to wander in their shadows fed into the mountain's consciousness. They were patient, unyielding, and eternal. Occasionally, a storm would roar through the silent peaks, lightning illuminating the stone faces that no human eye had carved, winds carrying sounds like the chanting of long-forgotten voices. Those who felt fear were spared nothing, but those who were open, who approached with reverence, might hear the mountain's gift, a glimpse into truths larger than any mortal life. The legend spread slowly among villages, a story whispered around fires, that the mountains held secrets, that travelers sometimes disappeared, but that those who did were changed, touched by eternity. Few believed, as fear and disbelief are the natural companions of mortals. Yet, occasionally, a hiker would leave a note in a cairn. I felt it. I saw beyond. Remember the mountains. And in those words, the mountains smiled in their silent, unshakable way. As for the three travelers, their journey never truly ended. They moved among peaks and valleys, among streams and hidden caves, witnesses to the ebb of time. Sometimes, on clear nights, when the moon hung high above the silent peaks, a faint shimmer could be seen along the ridges, a glint of eyes reflecting stars, a ripple across the stone as if someone had walked by. The mountains had claimed them, yet not in violence, but in revelation. They were no longer humans seeking stories. They had become the living memory of the mountains themselves, eternal, watching, waiting, and whispering to those brave enough to listen. And so the legend concludes not with an ending, but with a beginning. For every traveler who steps into the silent peaks joins the dance of memory and stone, bound to the mountains in ways that mortal words cannot capture. The peaks remain silent, yet they are never empty. They are alive, and they are waiting for those who seek, for those whose hearts dare to know, for those who will one day join the echoes of eternity that stir in every ridge, every stream, and every breath of wind across the mountains that never sleep.